I was on a train in the Netherlands this summer, coming back from on the day of the NATO summit. The top of my train exploded. That happened 5 places between Schiphol and The Hague and Utrecht the same day. Those are not teenagers. Somebody orchestrated attacks on the rail system in the Netherlands. And so I think our leaders have to stop treating these things as, maybe it was criminal, we don't have evidence, there was no Russian flag. Of course this is from the Russians. Of course it is. Or even if 50% of it's from the Russians, 50% of 300 attacks is from Russia or Russian sponsored. And so we need to stop treating these like a crime scene, and you have to have perfect evidence. Start putting consequences on the Russians for these activities. Let them complain, but they will keep doing it until we stop. And then finally, of course, our leaders have to talk to populations as if they are adults. Say, this is what's going on. This is what we have to do. This is the cost, but here's the cost of not acting.
Retired U.S. Army General Ben Hodges is warning that Europe faces a growing threat from Russian hybrid attacks, sabotage operations, energy system and other critical infrastructure. Trump is urging Ukraine to end the war by the 4th of July. Rubio says the U.S. will not impose sanctions against Ukraine. Ben Hodges described what he called an attack on train in the Netherlands during a NATO summit. Hodges said that during the summit last year, the roof of the train he was riding on exploded. He said the same day, February 2026, multiple disruptions occurred on Dutch rail lines. Hodges urged Europeans to recognize such events as deliberate attacks, not accidents. He said these incidents are part of a pattern of hybrid war by Russia. Hybrid warfare uses both military and non-military tactics, including cyber attacks, sabotage of infrastructure, disinformation, and other operations designed to destabilize governments and societies. Since 2022, Europe has seen a number of such incidents that Hodges and other analysts say fit this pattern. On 26 September 2022, explosions damaged sections of Nord Stream 1 and 2 pipelines on the Baltic Sea, which Denmark and Sweden considered sabotage. Later, October 22, fiber optic cables near Herne and Berlin-Karow in Germany were cut, disrupting northern rail traffic. In 2024, undersea cables connecting Finland, Estonia, Germany, and Sweden and Lithuania were damaged, affecting telecommunications. The same year, attempts to tamper with water infrastructure were reported in Finland and Sweden. On April 7, 2025, hackers opened floodgates at Norway's dam. Later, on December 31, 2025, cables between Finland and Estonia was disrupted. Poland also uncovered railway sabotage plots in 2025, with prosecutors charging individuals. Hodges' February 2025 Dutch train incident fits into this broader timeline of attacks on European infrastructure. In addition, in early 2026 has seen ongoing cyber attacks on energy and power systems in the Nordic region. Europeans say these attacks aim to create uncertainty, disrupt daily life, and pressure governments while avoiding direct military confrontation. Analysts know that hybrid attacks often appear small or indirect, but repeated incidents over time can destabilize countries. Hodges, who previously commanded U.S. Army Europe, has called for stronger defenses. He urges protection of critical grid, improved intel sharing, and rapid response to attacks. He also stressed that confirmed attacks should be publicly attributed to foreign actors. Meanwhile, an article published by The Telegraph reports that British paratroopers have completed a major military exercise as officials consider a possible peacekeeping mission in Ukraine if a ceasefire agreement is reached with Russia. The training took place in France and involved British and French airborne troops working on side by side. British soldiers came from the 16th Air Assault Brigade, a rapid reaction force designed to deploy on short notice. Troops practiced jumping into secure zones, sizing key positions, and coordinating with allied units. Military officials describe the drills as a final test of readiness. The exercise is part of broader contingency planning. British and French leaders have said they would consider sending peacekeepers to Ukraine if both Kyiv and Moscow agree a ceasefire. The proposed force would not take part in active fighting. Instead, its role would likely focus on monitoring a ceasefire, deterring renewed aggression, and helping stabilize the region. However, the report also highlights serious questions inside the UK defense community. The British Army currently has around 70,000 full-time personnel, its smallest size in centuries, committing up to 5,000 troops, roughly the size of full brigade, would be a significant undertaking. Defense analysts warn that sustaining that number overseas for months or years would require rotating units and possibly pulling troops from other missions. UK already has ongoing commitments tied to NATO operation in Eastern Europe. Some critics question whether the army has enough personnel, equipment and logistics to support this mission while adding a large peacekeeping deployment. Supporters of plan argue that preparing now is a responsive approach. They say having forces trained and ready strengthens diplomatic efforts and signals that Western allies are seriously about enforcing any kind of a ceasefire deal. Meanwhile, a new report from Bloomberg says US officials are quietly pushing for a peace agreement to end the war in Ukraine before July 4th, when President Trump also is expected to host a major national celebrations due to Independence Day. According to senior European officials, White House sees the anniversary as a symbolic deadline. The goal is to show progress on ending the war before the historic milestone. But there are few signs that Putin is prepared to accept a deal. European and NATO officials told Bloomberg that Moscow has not backed away from what they described as maximalist conditions for ending the conflict. The report says several rounds of talks involving US, Russian and Ukrainians have taken place in recent months. While discussions have been described as professional, there has been little meaningful progress toward a final agreement. Western officials remain skeptical about whether a deal can be reached. Privately, some acknowledge that major differences remain between Moscow and Kyiv, especially over territory, security guarantees, and Ukraine's long-term alignment. Ukrainian officials have not publicly committed to a July 4th deadline. President Zelensky has emphasized that any deal must include strong security guarantees to prevent future attacks. Some proposals under discussion could require approval from US Congress before taking effect. Professor of international politics Scott Lucas says Russia will reject Trump's offer on Ukraine and the war cannot be settled by 4th of July.
Well, I think Donald Trump needs to be speaking to Vladimir Putin if he's talking about ending the war within 1 month. I mean, President Zelensky and I think everyone in Ukraine is quite ready to end this Russian invasion. The question here is on what terms do you end that invasion? And as we await the outcome of the talks between Ukraine and the United States today, which are being held in Geneva, we know that Ukraine has proposed a demilitarized zone in Donetsk in the east of the country. We know that Ukraine has said, of course, that, it will arrange for monitoring of the ceasefire, working with other parties, as well as the Russians, to ensure that there's no further invasion. We know that Ukraine is ready for recovery and reconstruction rather than more war. But we also know that the Kremlin's latest statement, it said specifically, we continue to prepare for the special military operation. Our goals have not been achieved yet. That is from Dmitry Peskov. We know that Peskov said that there cannot be a leaders' meeting, as Donald Trump wants, as Zelensky wants. There cannot be a leaders' meeting until the terms are finalized. In other words, until the Kremlin gets all its demands fulfilled. So the Kremlin is still calling for the surrender of Ukraine. And indeed, Russian media have reported in the past 24 hours that when it comes to the elections for the Duma, the Russian lower house of parliament in September, that the Kremlin intends to, or the ruling party of Vladimir Putin intends to pursue those elections by pushing the military issue. In other words, that they have to persist with that invasion. And that's the basis on hope they will get their people reelected. So now the reason why Vladimir Zelensky keeps saying, look, let's have the leaders meeting. Let's, I'll meet Mr. Putin and then Mr. Trump can join us. The reason why he says that is because he knows that's what Trump wants to hear. He knows at the same time, however, the Kremlin's not going to agree for it. So we have to go through this song and dance of Ukraine continuing to say, ready for an end to the invasion, and then the Kremlin continuing through various people, through Mr. Medvedev, the former president, through Mr. Peskov, the Kremlin spokesman, through the Kremlin's pet members of parliament, continuing to say, no, that the Kremlin's demands, the root causes of the war, those all have to be settled on Russia's terms. And so the dance will continue whether or not we get a third set of Ukraine, U.S.-Russian talks next month.
Meanwhile, U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio said U.S. is working to bring Ukraine and Russia back to the negotiating table, emphasizing that diplomacy remains the only path to end the war. Rubio made the comments following a series of discussions between U.S., Ukraine, and European officials. Speaking to reporters, Rubio said Trump has expressed frustration over why Ukraine and Russia have not yet reached a deal. Quote, the president doesn't understand why the war hasn't ended yet, Rubio said, noting that U.S. continues to push Moscow and Kyiv to engage directly. Rubio described U.S. role as mediator and facilitator, working to narrow issues and find solutions without imposing terms on Ukraine. Quote, we are trying to help both sides identify common ground so that lasting peace is possible, he said.
If they want to make an arms deal with the three countries, we're prepared to talk about it. If they don't want to do it, then we won't have one. We'll just keep doing what we need to do. So we don't want to walk away from we know that at the end, the war in Ukraine does not have a military solution. That war will be settled through a negotiation. And right now, we are the only country in the world that can be a catalyst for negotiation. If we forfeit that role, no one else can do it. That said, do I believe the president's patience is infinite? I do not. But I'm not going to forecast for you when that runs out or at what point he decides not to do it any longer.
That's all for today. Subscribe to our YouTube channel and glory to Ukraine.